You're on the John Frederick Radio Network. We are trucking the truth across America. It's great to have you with us, as always, and we are live today. This is a special edition, and we have the honor of having some time today with Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla, and he is a former United Nations official in New York and a human development and security expert. So it's great to have former officials at the UN with us here on the John Fredericks Radio Network because they give a very different perspective on the world that you're going to get in some of the more legacy media. I don't know if you've ever been to the UN, and just being there, I've done my show from the UN several times, and it is a fascinating experience to meet so many people from around the globe with so many different perspectives. Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, you were a former UN official, so you've been involved in that. And in the United Nations, sir, you did great work on human security and social development across really the Gulf, the Middle East, and the globe. What were some of your main takeaways from the UN, the things that you worked on and that you think we really need to be focused on moving forward in the world, sir?
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And I have only I could mention two areas of work that I have conducted through my work with the UN. One of them was in Laos. Laos is a country that was considered to be the world's third largest producer of opium. The country is quite had a poor population and poor income and all sorts of negatives. We started our projects in Laos, and we introduced livelihood programs. We promoted gender perspectives. Of course, the legacy of producing opium for long time, and considering as a third world. So it was quite obvious that they have got big population of opium addicts. And most of the addicted people
in Laos, opium addicts, because
of their production.
They were producing it for obviously sale, nefarious terms, but their own people were addicted on it.
Absolutely.
How did that happen? Just because they were there and it was...
It is a kind of tradition, also exists in many parts of Latin America. They use coca leaf as a cultural medicine or a cultural experience or cultural events. Mm-hmm. So opium has been there for years. As you may know, opium is one of the oldest drugs that exist, and the international community dealt with it since 1909. The first convention on international control of opium was in 1912. Mm-hmm. So it is back. This is a phenomena that exists from all time. So we try to reduce the production, and that is for the interest of the world community. And we manage through our livelihood projects, training, providing livelihood programs, alternative crops that produce. Laos was a country that people lived for $130 or $40, $130 to $150 a year. A year. Their income was $150 to $200, max less than $200 a year. We tried through our program to increase from $150 to $1,000 something through the farmers. The farmers that they used to produce all these opium poison things to sell it to the outside world, and their own people use it inside. We tried to increase their income from 150 to 1,500, and there are so many success stories about that. I don't have, unfortunately, pictures or something to show you, but we have so much done. And through training and crop substitute, we did crop substitute in that area. Double cropping of rice. They use rice twice, too much. So producing rice twice a year. Then other things, fruits. For instance, we introduced fruits with better qualities and said to sell it to neighboring countries. We introduced road develop some road. I can't say
To be able to move the goods.
to move the
be
goods
able
to the market,
to market.
and we build schools. The schools that I'm talking about, not the schools that cost millions of dollars or hundreds of dollars. Each school was costing us $700. In a neighborhood that peasants and poor people. So we educated the women to become workers, to do some work, and to produce and to support their husband and to support their own. To be teachers and all these kind of things. So that improved the life, and through this, within 10, 15 years of our program, Laos in 2006-7 became no longer third world producer.
So with Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla, he is a former United Nations official and human development security expert with us here today in Washington, D.C. on the John Fredericks Radio Network. So if I just may call you Dr. Mohammed, can I say that? So like when you were trying to get these things done in Laos, trying to get the schools built, roads to bring the double crops to market, cut down on the opium production and change that, increase the income, how did you get that done? Did you have to work through their government? Like, how did that work?
We developed a national plan for the government. Our responsibility as a UN. At the UN to produce a national plan to be accepted by the government, by the ministries. The ministries and back to the higher echelons. And then all of our activities together with other UN agencies. So, for instance, there in Laos, we were able to do that. In Myanmar, next door, we were the agency coordinating all the work of other UN agencies. We were the one reliable to do the job. So sometimes you have good credibility more than others. So we were coordinating the work for others as well.
So you would just develop a plan and submit
national
that,
yes, of course.
national plan at the United Nations.
At the United Nations, and we'll submit to the
and
government.
You would submit it to the government of Laos.
And then we negotiate with them together, and with their input and all kind of things. We will do feasibility study first of all. We do the need assessment, and then feasibility, and all this together, and then we produce a document that is, we see it fit, and then we discuss it with them, and with their contribution, we come with a document that is both sides balancedly approved, and the government approves it, and then we seek a funding request from other donor countries, like United States, like European, like other countries, like Qatar, so many countries.
So then you would go to Kuwait or the U.S. or France and say, here's a plan to help Laos, and we need X dollars.
Exactly. We sell we have the project, and we
have the project.
Yes.
And you want funding for the. So you go to Western governments.
Nowadays, Qatar is playing a major role also, and Qatar, as a matter of fact, nowadays supports a project called Doha Declaration. Doha Declaration to promote rule of law. This is 60 years of the UN never had a government to support financially implementing a declaration. This declaration promotes presidential rule of law. And if you have law and order in place in any country of the world, then you could do a lot of things with them. Because without law and order, you cannot...
Got to have law and order,
absolutely,
right? Without law and order, you have nothing.
You can't do nothing, yes.
So this is fascinating, though, Dr. Mohammed, because a lot of our listeners in the eastern part of the country, from New York like me, you look at the UN, and all we ever think about is how many times they vote against the U.S. interest in the Foreign Relations Committee. And we look at that, and remember, when Ed Koch was the mayor there, he said, if it was up to him, they'd all leave. But there's very little press in the U.S. on the good work, like you just said, that the United Nations is doing for these other countries. There's no press on that. A lot of it is just negative on what you haven't done or what failed. But when you tell me a story like Laos, that I didn't really understand the great work that the UN does in some of these areas, and I'm sure that's just one example of many, 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 right?
Exactly, and US, in fact, was a major donor. US was one of the major donors for my projects in Laos. And then they went to other places, of course. They are really major players at improving the lives of people around the world. U.S. is one of the major major donor to all UN agencies, not only in the area of drug and crime control.
Well, because the purpose of the United Nations is make the world a better place.
Absolutely,
Right, that's the
absolutely.
purpose of it.
And Qatar coming now to provide this one major contribution of $50 million for the rule of law is something amazing. No ever government paid for that.
Well, the government of Qatar, no doubt, has stepped up in a lot of different areas. And I want to talk about the Gulf Center for Criminal Justice. Because, as you said, Dr. Mohammed, without law and order, you can't get anything implemented. You can't get anything done.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that and how that works right now in the Gulf.
This center, we had the idea of establishing several centers around the globe to be working with law enforcement officials around the globe and to give us the latest information as it happens. This is the purpose of that center and similar center in Asia and other areas. So they have to build network of coordinated action with other people in different globe, so they know what is happening now, and then they tell the agency, national agency, this is happening and you have to, so then you are able to detect what is happening in preemptive action.
So, again, because you're dealing with different governments that have different positions on some of this, how do you navigate your way through those regimes?
The national agencies, when they establish the center, then they have to work together with the national agencies on the interest. It is in the interest of that government and that government. They might have different political issues, but on the interest of each other, they work together, and this has been very successful. One of the success stories of the UN also in this area.
That's amazing. We're with Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla. He is a former United Nations official and a human development and security expert as we talk about criminal intelligence and the Gulf Center. For that, I want to stay on the Gulf for a minute because, as you know, I cover it on my show in depth, and I'm going to get to the blockade and how, in my opinion, that has been a colossal failure for the Saudis and for Bahrain and Egypt and the UAE. But let's get to Qatar's contributions to social and human development. This is one thing that's been really overlooked in the Gulf, and it's very tough to get really accurate information out because a lot of people look at the Gulf states and they're not really sure who's on what side, right? We get a lot of that. And of course, the United States liberated Kuwait back in the early 90s when Saddam Hussein invaded it. And of course, now Qatar has become a very wealthy country with their LNG, their liquefied natural gas. So what has the Gulf's contributions and specifically Qatar's contributions to social and human development been? Explain that.
Let me take you a little bit back to the history of the UN.
I'd like to go back to
yes,
the history of the UN. Yes.
The UN was established based on the idea that came from the American and the British during the war.
This was after the League of Nations.
Yeah, exactly.
Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations.
Absolutely. In 1941, during the war, those group of people that were in war, they decided to stop the war. While the League of Nations was established after the war ended. So they have taken into account at that time, and for the first time, the United Nations came out from the American, let us build a new organization called United Nations. And then it goes into 1945 when they developed the charter. So the charter was developed with a main purpose to save the people for the pain of war. They lost about 80 million during the World War II. 80 million people were lost. So to save worldwide, to save the people from the scourge of war, that was the main purpose. The second purpose was, and this is very crucial, uphold international law. Because if you uphold international law, then you have law and order. Rule of law plays a role, positive role, to build the nations. And here, second purpose of the UN is to uphold the establishment of the UN was to uphold international law. Then it comes to live together as neighbors, as friendly neighbors, to work together on developing economic and social for people, and then it comes the UN to be as a center in the event that some conflicts arises here and there, to use the UN as a platform or the center for negotiation to have peaceful settlement for such issues that arise at that time, wherever it arises. Based on that, the UN was established and member states became members.
So the United Nations, as we know it today, was established in 1945. That's when the charter came in.
Absolutely.
And that replaced the old League of Nations, which didn't get anything done, obviously.
The League of Nations had failures, and this is the lessons learned from the League of Nations was that upholding rule of law. Now, some members of the League of Nations did not become a party, and you may want to know some of those countries that they were not. And if you are in a group or in an organization and not playing your role, not becoming a member, that is...
I don't want to digress here, but what were some of the key countries that didn't join the League of Nations?
U.S. was the key player in establishing it, but U.S. also
didn't join it.
To join it, but didn't join it because the Congress would approve it. Okay, that was one of the things.
They saw it as potentially interventionist.
At that time, they saw it in different ways.
Right.
Then other group of people, like French and British, they used the center to be in their interests.
Right.
Some others didn't play a role. But the League of Nations had one interesting positive element in it, that they expelled a country when didn't comply with the rules. That doesn't exist today in the League of Nations, in the United Nations Charter.
If you didn't comply with their charter, whatever the League of Nations was, they throw you out.
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
you cannot comply.
You don't have that. That
don't have that.
privilege you don't have. That's not. I don't know how it didn't, for so many reasons that I may not be able to discuss at this short event, happen.
So the charter was 1945, so you took us back to that.
Yeah.
And so let's go further. Go ahead.
Now, then the UN started to implement the charter. In doing so, in 1948, adopted the Human Rights Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That provides all kind of rights and obligations towards member states and towards the nationals, member states and the national. Member states have to do something, the national has to do something. So then it started a few years after, 10 years, became the decay for decolonization. Governments became independent, some of them directly, some of them by force, some of them by the use of the UN, through the UN General Assembly. Then when they became independent, they need some infrastructure. So there came the decay for economic and social development in those countries, supported by the colonial powers. Then it comes to when you had the economic and development issues developed, they needed to be more further independent of their own.
Right.
So the decay for transfer of technology.
Right.
After that became the decay for globalization.
Right.
And you saw all of that and so forth. Then now we are today in decay for digital era. So UN is doing what it can, but it depends on the government how to do it. Now the Gulf states became members. Most of the Gulf states, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, they got freely independence, while Oman had to go through the UN. And Saudi was established previously by themselves. The Saudi was never existed, so established in 1932, the Saudi came. There was nothing called Saudi Arabia. Before it was the Najd and all these four regions of the Arabian Peninsula. So the Saudi became about, or established, if you look at the history, in 1930-32, they became the Saudi Arabia. Before there was nothing such. So then we go to coming to the point that how Qatar is doing. Qatar until 1995 was same as other work as usual and the same slow pace of development like other Gulf states, like other other countries in Africa and Asia and Latin America. So slowly developing. Until Qatar.
Plus, there was nothing there but sand.
Absolutely.
There was nothing there.
Nothing there, yes, because everything, there was nothing in that. Then the development of modern Qatar starts in 1996 onward, when His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa, the Emir, the father Emir now, he became the ruler of Qatar or the leader of Qatar in 27 June 1995, I suppose.
And then it was if you go back to the history there, because Qatar had gained their independence earlier than that, right? When did Qatar actually
in
gain
1971.
Right. So
And most of the GCC, the 1937 to 1973.
all the GCC in the 69, 71, they all get independence, but it took 24 years. The Father Emir, as they call him, Father Emir takes over, and then has the vision. Because remember, I think it was the U.S. Shell Corporation was there, and they abandoned it, right? They said it was too expensive for them to extract the natural gas because they couldn't figure out how to liquefy it.
You see,
right? Isn't that the way it went down?
It was some sort, exactly, before.
Right.
But when the Emir came, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Hamad, who's the leader of modern Qatar, he had gained 20 years of experience as the Crown Prince. Mm-hmm. He saw the world development. Mm-hmm. In 1990s, the World Summit, Earth Summit, that was where the world community is starting to develop and prepare for 21st century. Mm-hmm. Then other UN conferences until at least 2 Millennium Development Goals. So the Emir Sheikh Hamad was observing all the development in the UN, and he was a staunch supporter of the UN. He loved the UN, and therefore he became and developed the vision for Qatar, future Qatar, from those development for the ideas was coming from the UN conferences and calling for improvement worldwide, not only for Qatar. So he took that seriously and they developed the vision for Qatar, and from there he started. But he needed money, definitely, when he came to the power.
Right.
I think he didn't have much of dollars.
They were so. Times when the Emir first took power, right? They were in debt and they couldn't pay the government workers.
Absolutely. And he was creative.
He had to borrow money.
He was a leader.
Right.
He had a vision. He was very brave. He had a political will, and he wanted to develop Qatar as the role model and an effective United Nations, as it was called by the UN summits and
So Dr. Mohammed, and so what you're saying
Brazil.
is when the Emir took over in 95, he based a lot of his development and visionary plans with Qatar from what he learned in the UN. So he took
out of the UN. That was coming for the whole community. But he took it seriously. He loved the UN. He took it seriously. And then he had a very bright wife, the lady Sheikha Moza,
right.
Her Highness. She was very bright. She was supportive. And they worked jointly. You can't find in the Gulf, to be frankly speaking. Now, Sheikh Hamad, when he came, he was 43 years old. At that time, he was young compared to neighboring countries. Mm-hmm. All of them in above 60 and 70s. So he was young.
He had more energy.
He was more energy.
Plus he had his wife.
And he had background, education. He had modern education. Others, they didn't have that. Mm-hmm. You have to, we're not comparing, but others they didn't have. He had more to offer. He had, in modern in business language, he had competencies which other leaders didn't have. Leadership, vision, creativity. He developed LNG by creativity. There was a need, and there was no demand for it.
Gas,
absolutely, there was
which
no.
Is what turned the country around.
There was no demand for it. There was no the notion of looking for that. That was not accepted globally. But he went for it, and he was very brave to take that initiative forward and to make it happen. And based on that, look at today. He turned Qatar after 18 years of leadership from 85 till 2013. June,
right.
He made Qatar from zero to $300 billion power on an economic and political area. He developed the education. They believed in education. He and his wife, they tried to develop education that doesn't exist in any part of the Gulf.
It is a tremendous history that they have. We're with Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla. He's a former United Nations official and an expert on human development and security throughout the world, and especially in the Middle East and the Gulf, and talking about the Gulf and now what Qatar has done. And I was fascinated when I went there in my visit. I spent a day at University City, I think it's called, right, with the 7 colleges. U.S. colleges.
Qatar Foundation.
And the Qatar Foundation.
Yes.
And there's Northwestern and Andrew Carnegie
Georgetown,
Mellon, Virginia Tech, which I'm a basketball fan. And I mean, it goes on and on and on. Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, all of these colleges there available to people in the Gulf to come, so they value education. But it was amazing. The other thing they've done, which I've noticed, because we've been giving a lot of coverage lately to the Venezuelan crisis, and you look at the money that Venezuela was making when they were selling all this oil, they were getting a good price for it, and how they squandered it all. It through corruption and just spending it on stuff they shouldn't have, and whatever else happened. You know, and now they've got 80,000% inflation, and the country has collapsed. And you look at the Saudis. I mean, they've made a lot of money through their oil, and a lot of corruption there, and now the Saudis are broke, right? Basically.
Absolutely, yeah.
You look at Qatar, and they've taken the money they've made and they've invested it globally in a very smart and tight way. And so one of the conversations I had with one of the college professors there were telling me that if their LNG reserves ran out tomorrow, like they had enough money invested where they could earn the same income they are now for like 150 years or something. I mean, it was a massive amount of money because they've taken what they've earned and they've invested it smartly, globally, rather than waste it.
To be frankly speaking, leadership is an art. And His Highness Sheikh Hamad was really honest person, and they had a vision, as we said. He was devoted to improve the Qatar. He has a passion for it. The language I'm using, passion. You need to have it with the art of how to do it. Now, imagine Qatar, Sheikh Hamad hosting the World Cup. Why did he want to? Is it that for sport? Because he loved. Some people say he loved the sport. It's nothing of that. I don't see it myself as a professional UN. I don't think he loved the sport as much as he loved this country. He wanted to bring the World Cup, and the World Cup demands so much infrastructure to modernize Qatar. If he would have done it on his own without the World Cup, the neighbors would have said, hey, why are you doing changes? Why are you doing this kind of thing? You stay with us. You're making trouble for us. We're not done so much. He has increased the infrastructure, railways for public people, transportation, the education which he has done, the diversification of income from art, museums, you name it, the port. Look at the Qatar Air is one of the source of income. Qatar Air is from zero, go back to the day he started until now. It is one of the largest, one of the major airlines in the world. And the airport.
Profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And the airport, he made the huge airport that is compatible with any of the regions. Look, most of those countries that they are imposing embargo, they have got the worst airports, the worst airlines, any of them. I don't want to name, but look, Qatar has the largest, the modernest airline and airport. That brings money in. Mm-hmm. Why not? Right. So he wants to improve the Qatar. So right. This is all goes for who will benefit? The citizens of Qatar and the living people. Right. All those that live in Qatar, they have better jobs, better possibilities, better future for their own and their children and future. So Qatar is opening up to tourism, to all kind of things. Even in an environment area, Qatar is doing too much.
I think they just approved a new luxury cruise line coming in.
Look at that.
For tourism.
Yeah, look, Sheikh Hamad had the passion, not only the passion, he has the creativity. He has developed the old town, Souk Waqf, something called, if you've been there, you go and see it. Look, this was never there. Mm-hmm. He expanded on it to be a center. And the way they developed it with state-of-the-art modern technologies for that area. This is something amazing, never heard of in the history of the Gulf. He has changed the country. And Qatar is a more reliable international partner. If you look at the UN, he loved the UN, he was a strong supporter, he and his wife, until now, the Sheikh Moza, His Highness, she's the main member of the several UN prestigious board of directors, and she's providing education not only for Qatar, not only for the region, the Arab world, you may say. It is global. They are introducing something to support the youth. The Arab world, they need support. The youth, they need support.
Right.
So the program for supporting youth finishing education, they need jobs. The jobless people, they go against their own government. So Qatar is supporting them indirectly. So they're doing so much, these two people. Qatar is amazing what they have done. And how many UN conferences were hosted in the UN? The Doha round was to improve trade. So they have done so much UN conferences, so much of this, and they are available at the international arena, helping with. So it is a country that is more trustworthy to work with and compatible with the modern, what the Western people they like. And of course, we have to go on. The train is going. You have to catch up with the train and be in the same train. Otherwise, you miss the opportunities. So Qatar is trying to catch up with the modern life, and they're doing their best. And that is what they are securing human security issues for their own and for the neighbors as well as the global.
All of this doesn't exactly get reported accurately in the legacy media. That's why we asked you on today and to talk about the UN and give the history of it. We're with Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla. We're live in Washington, D.C. Dr. Mohammed is a former United Nations high-ranking official, and he's a human development and security expert. He's worked on the development of a lot of countries, not only in the Gulf and the Middle East, but around the globe, Southeast Asia, and other areas, and he's very, very, very well versed in this. I want to get to the blockade, which is always my favorite topic, because if you were to teach a class in the Harvard Business School and the class was called How to Screw Up a Blockade, this would be it. I mean, this is the blockade that was done, the embargo by what is commonly called the Gang of Four, Egypt, Bahrain, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, on the Qatari government with a list of demands that they were never going to do. So basically they wanted to overturn the government because they would have never done that. But it's failed on so many fronts that I've gone into before. But tell me if I'm wrong. I thought one of the really mistakes that the Saudis made in this, Dr. Mohammed, is they banked on the fact that the Qatari people would be outraged over it. They wouldn't be able to stock their shelves. There would be shortages. And I think that's what the Saudis and UAE thought was going to happen, right? But you're a student of history, right? Remember when Hitler invaded Russia, right? And you go back in history, and one of the reasons he said he did that is because Stalin had murdered all of his senior military leadership because he was afraid that they were planning a coup. So he killed his generals. The Nazi regime thought, look, they don't have the leadership. We're just going to be able to go through there and get to Moscow or wherever we're going because they killed their generals. So you look at the blockade, and I think one of the things that the Saudis and UAE really underestimated was the level of competence in the Qatar government, because they're all educated because everybody there goes to college. So like when I went there and met with ministers and their staffs, everybody had a master's degree. Like, so the government was so educated and so competent. Don't you think that was one of the misconceptions that the blockading countries had?
Absolutely, you're right. You hit the hammer on the right
Thank you.
pin. The thing is that the Gulf states think of Qatar on different. It is a misunderstanding and on different issues. First of all, when they went against Sheikh Hamad, the father Emir, at that time, they failed. They wanted to change the government in 1985. They failed because they thought he's new, but Sheikh Hamad was well educated, modern education, an experienced guy. 20 years of work on day-to-day, hands-on, working with his father. So therefore, that was a failure. Qatar always learns from lessons of the past. So when we have the Sheikh Tamim now as Emir, they thought this Sheikh Tamim is 33 years old, just young, very young guy. Who is he to be Emir? So this was a misconception by them. Sheikh Tamim was very well educated, even better than his father. He's
He was overseas, right? He was Paris, right? He was educated in Paris.
Paris and
United Kingdom.
United Kingdom, with the experience working as a crown prince with his father, and this father is different than the previous father. So the Sheikh Hamad was a very talented person, very wise. And in the Arab world, you need the head of a state to be wise. In the Western, you have got constitution, you have got from zero to up, from bottoms up. In the Arab world, you need from top to bottoms. You know, if the leader is not well educated, well organized, and well tailored, then the failure comes, because the other ministers and other parties could advise wrongly or this way. And there is the notion of having experience and advisors doesn't exist in many parts of the Arab world still, until today. So the Sheikh Tamim was very well seasoned by his father, very well educated, and he has a different culture. He speaks several languages. So when you speak several languages, you have got several cultures, and it's not easy to you act as a three person or two according to the language you speak. So you've got one language, one person; two languages, two person; three languages. You have got different cultures. So that is one of the advantage of Sheikh Tamim. Then you have him experience from the past failure. Then he took the blockade as an advantage, turn that to opportunity, and that's why make Qatar a blueprint coming out of this blockade. Qatar is like triangle. You have got one side Emirates by air and land, other side Bahrain, the third side is Saudi Arabia, air and land. So if in reality Qatar didn't have the expertise and didn't learn from the lessons apart, would have been limited to 1 month and then failure, and the people could have rise. Definitely people, and Qatar has expanded. Now the population of Qatar is more than 2.5 million. So without any income, food stuff, how do you survive? Everything comes from the land. But Sheikh Tamim changed the thing to become a power, to be opportunity for improving Qatar. He has refined all kind of laws that needed to be done in place, and this is what we say, upholding rule of law, the purpose of the United Nations. So he is up to it. He is not just somebody who comes, who doesn't. Who on earth in the Gulf has got that expertise to bring first. If you want to do something, you have to have legislation. So he, in his first statement after the embargo to the Shura Council, he said we have to upgrade our legislation where we have to upgrade it or complete it, or where we don't have to introduce new laws to facilitate. And therefore, he has been able, putting legislation in place, and then building good relations, strengthening the relation he had with other governments, and making new relations. So it is a relation. It is the notion of United Nations. It is in the blood of Sheikh Hamad, the mother, Her Highness Sheikh Moza, and Sheikh Tamim. They support the UN up to now. They are doing all kind of things, and it's not for the interest of Qatar, but for the region. And that is why the other countries of the region, they feel different. So they feel incomplete. They feel shortcoming. And how to overcome that by doing some nasty things. This is unfair what they have done. And this is again, we bring it together in the goal and objective of the United Nations. What was the thing after the saving the future generation, was to uphold international law. Article 1, 2. And 55 of UN, it provides for, if you have got any kind, that no country should embargo by itself, on individual. No self-decision on that issue. So it is against the law of international. And if you are party to the United Nations, you have to respect the agreement that you have done. You have to enact legislation to prevent you from such acts of illegal. How could you violate the United Nations Charter, Article 1 and 2, and impose unilateral illegal imposition of embargo? On what basis? Is it your national? So why you are up to now? You are in 2018 and you are not up to date with the international law. How could you be a member of the United Nations? How could you act such a negative issue to a neighbor who is sharing you borders, sharing you with you all the principles of brotherhood? And how could you, and such UN calls for living together in a nice neighborhood and friendly? How could you, go against all the principles that you accepted as a member of the United Nations? So therefore, their shortcoming is illegal, is not doing their good homework and upholding international law. All I could say, that is the main reason for doing such acts of incompetent.
Well, and then the blockade is incompetent because it didn't meet any of the objectives of the blockading countries. In fact, there's an argument that I make that says it absolutely backfired, and this is going to go down in history as the most failed embargo ever, because, as you say, it forced the Qatari government to look for other development, and they increased their shipping lanes, they increased their trading partners dramatically, they've increased their relationships with other countries, and what they found is they were able to buy better products at a cheaper price when they got out of the GCC family, which was to the benefit of the people. I remember going there one time and just walking on the street and going in a store, and I just asked a couple of people outside what they thought of the blockade and how that affected their ability to buy things. And one Qatari woman who had 3 children with her said, she shrugged her shoulders and she said, I have better choices and I'm paying less money, so it's actually a good thing. I mean, that's what she said. More choices and cost less.
Absolutely.
So it has so backfired economically. So now the Saudis are doubling down, trying to build some kind of a moat or something that I can't seem to understand what they're doing with that. What is the end game here? For the blockading countries that's failed, what's the end game?
It depends on the mood, unfortunately, because they don't uphold international law, and therefore it is their act is not based on any cultural or international law, and therefore it is ambiguous at the moment. It is ambiguous, and I don't see when they come to their mind and try to do something that is honorable for the Gulf countries as to live together as neighbors. And in compliance with international law. If regardless of neighborhood or Islamichood or whatever you name it, but in compliance with international law, because we are all members of the United Nations. And
so Dr. Mohammed, why hasn't the United Nations stepped in?
United Nations cannot step in unless it is being asked for. This is first of all. We go to United Nations is being established to be as a center and platform for complaints. If you have any complaints, you go to the UN, right. And therefore then there is a resolution by General Assembly, and the General Assembly will forward that resolution to the Security Council, and Security Council will act on it. Mm-hmm. And we hope that the United States, as a member of Security Council, could take an initiative by itself as in fact, that United States is the custodian of the United Nations Charter. Article 110 of the Charter provides United States of America to be the custodian of the Charter. So that is why America has to play a really role model in the international affairs, and to see this kind of rogue states that they pop up between time and time, to put them in the right place. I mean, as a role model, I'm just saying that the United States should play a role model and abide by the international law by itself. Mm-hmm. You cannot be a role model if you don't comply with the international law and international conventions. There are many areas that U.S. still needs to rethink about it, like climate is affecting everybody, mm-hmm. like other things, Mm-hmm. So it's not only in the area of human rights, mm-hmm. because U.S. has got a annual report, huge report on human rights. shortfalls by member states, but also should look into other areas. And we are going to the 21st century, and we are the digital area. We have got crime of electronic crimes, and we need to face it. And therefore, there is a need for international law to be developed. And I hope that the United States, affected with kind of crime against Qatar, and Qatar as well as the United States, being affected by hackers of electronic crimes, and therefore it should be the ambassadors to promote a new convention on electronic convention, international law.
Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla has been with us today, former United Nations official. He's a human development and security expert on the global stage. And Dr. Mohammed, I want to really thank you for joining us today. We're out of time. A fascinating conversation. I learned so much, and I hope our listeners did also. Gives you a little bit of a different perspective of the United Nations. And, you know, I, for one, I guess didn't realize that the U.S. was the custodian of the U.S. Charter in Article 1.
Well, 110.
Article 110.
110, yeah.
Very fascinating. Your knowledge is a little intimidating for me, so I hope I didn't ask any dumb questions as I was trying to learn. But I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope to have you back. And this is an interview that anybody that's interested in the international scene should take a listen at, because you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to get a very different perspective of what the UN does, what its original charter set up to do, and how it can make an impact. And I thought your first example with Laos and Southeast Asia is something I didn't know. Fascinating. Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla, thank you for being with us, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. John Fredericks Radio Network, special edition, live with Dr. Mohammed Al-Mulla, former UN official at the United Nations. We'll be right back. Stay with us.